So remember that you got a paper coming up. So it's due tomorrow if you haven't submitted it yet. I've seen some of you guys have already started submitting it. So remember, it was originally due early in this week when I extended the deadline to Friday. So hopefully you guys are almost done. Jessica, I think it's you who I still owe an email to. Didn't you send me a draft, and didn't I forget to email you back? I think that was you. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. After class, I'm going to look over your draft and send you some notes. If you want to take an extra day or two to submit it after I send you the notes, feel free, because that's my mistake. I meant to email you back earlier, but I've been kind of running around this week like a chicken with my head cut off, so I haven't got to it yet. But
trust me, I completely understand. You're fine.
Yeah, so I'll get to you right after class. I didn't forget about you. So like the past few days I've been on the road like 3 hours a day, driving back and forth to Logan for Wyoming County campus. I've been on the road quite a bit. But yeah, so remember that the Thursday after break, we will not be holding a class session that day, and as such, there won't be any readings that day. Next time we will have a reading will be when we meet 3 weeks. 3 weeks from now on the 31st of March. That'll be our next class session. And that day we will talk about Henry James's book, The Turn of the Screw. Okay. Turn of the Screw is about the same length as this. It's not too long. So it's also another novella. So The Turn of the Screw for that day. And then a week or so after that, we'll read Haunting Hill House. But what I will be doing immediately after the break, I'm going to give you guys some assignments to do that week, but they will be introductions to the research paper. So I'm going to kind of go over for you guys in a video, like what all is going to be involved with this research paper project coming up. In a nutshell, what you guys are going to be doing is you're going to be picking one of these texts that we've studied this semester, and you're just going to take some type of angle in looking at one of these texts, and or maybe apply that text to some other texts. So let's say, for instance, you want to do your research paper on, I don't know, nature versus nurture and Frankenstein, for instance. You would look up what all these different scholars and stuff have said about that subject of nature versus nurture and Frankenstein. So you'll kind of compile a list of professional articles about any one of these books. And basically, you're just going to kind of be reading over what these articles have to say. And then after reading them over, you're going to try to ask yourself, where am I in this conversation? Like, what can I add to this conversation? Right? This is how literature scholarship is actually made. Like literature, like in order for a scholar to get a literature paper published, usually it has to be some type of like new interpretation of a text, right? But they happen all the time. You're like, what can I really say about Frankenstein that hasn't been said before, right? You'd be surprised. So one reason why I like to teach the Gothic in 102 for this particular class, well, for one, I'm a weirdo, right? I love the Gothic, right? But two, all these books that we covered, all of them have tons of articles about them, tons. Haunting Hill House is the book we're reading that has the least amount of articles on it, and even it has a pretty fair amount. So all the stuff we're reading, there's tons of scholarship about it all. So over the next couple of weeks, we still have a couple more things left to read. So, but over the next couple of weeks, maybe think to yourself, maybe reflect back on some of our previous conversations. Ask yourself, like, which one of our discussions maybe interested you the most. Like maybe there was a particular thing we talked about in one of those discussions that really grabbed your attention. And if you can sort of pinpoint a moment like that, that could possibly be a paper idea for some of you. So over the next couple of weeks, that's something to think about, like which one of these books might you want to do. Of course, you can also do something like maybe you want to do some type of analysis of a film adaptation of one of these books we're reading, or as we'll talk about when we get to the Turn of the Screw, the Bly Manor show on Netflix was directly inspired by that story. But yeah, there's tons of adaptations of Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and even the Haunting of Hill House. There's 2 films plus the TV show. One of the films is really bad, by the way. I can't wait to talk about it with you guys. But the possibilities of research topics are endless. I guess that's kind of where I'm going here. So every one of you should have some type of thing that we've talked about in class that maybe drew your attention. That might be something you might consider doing. So like nature and nurture in Frankenstein, right? Genetic engineering in Frankenstein. Like a lot of the subjects we discussed last week would be great research topics. I really enjoyed our discussions of Frankenstein. I thought we knocked those out of the ballpark. We had some really good conversations on that book. So I don't know, is there anything that speaks to you guys so far as, yeah, that might be something I might want to do? Or is this too far ahead in advance to think about right now? But is there anything right especially struck you guys that you might want to write about later?
I think I'd like to probably write about the nature versus nurture thing, just because I think it's really interesting, but I also know that will probably be a popular topic, and I don't want you to have to read the same thing over and over again.
Well, yeah, that's a possibility. If that's what you want to do, then by all means take it up, Haley. There might be something else that strikes you in the next couple of weeks, though. You never know. Which one of you guys wrote about nature versus nurture in 101 for me? I remember one of you guys wrote about nature and nurture. Which one of you guys did that? One of you guys did. I forget which one. One of you guys did a really good nature nurture topic for me in 101, but it was just about the topic in general and not a book. But yeah, I mean, that would definitely be a good one. Something else to think about. Let's say you really did good on one of your short papers. We still are going to have another short paper following the break. After the break, I'll probably give you guys a bunch of research. I'll probably give you guys a bunch of questions, either on Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll or the Turn of the Screw. Okay, but I'll give you guys another short paper prompt too. Something else that you might do later is I will give you the choice to make one of your shorter papers a bigger paper. Right? So you can take that like 3-page paper and make it into like a 7-page paper. So that's something that you guys will be able to do later too if you want. So you can take that smaller one and make it a bigger one. So except when you do make it a bigger one, you'll incorporate research and all this stuff into it, right? Yeah, that's basically what I'll do after the break. I'll make a video introducing you to the topic, but I'll also have a video up that shows you how to look around for sources and things like that. I'll go into making those videos knowing that you guys haven't made your decisions yet on what you might want to do, but I'll at least kind of get your brains going and gearing in that direction. Okay. And but yeah, so that's all I'm really going to ask you guys to do that week after breaks. Watch a couple of videos and get you thinking along those lines. If you want to get an early start on the reading, that's something you could do too while we have that week off, right? Reading The Turn of the Screw or Haunting Hill House, maybe get a jump start on it. That might save you some grief later in the semester. So if you have spare time, get ahead during that week after break. But hopefully some of you guys will come out to the play we're doing. I think it's going to be a good play. I was at the practice yesterday, and I think it's shaping up. So yeah, so you guys definitely come out to that. I'd love to meet some of you guys. So come out, say hello either one of those days of the play, from the 24th to the 27th. Okay, so the Thursday night that we would normally have class will be our first performance. So anything else? Questions, comments, concerns, any class business, anything in general that you guys want to address?
I had something. So you did say for the paper that we're writing right now that's due tomorrow, that one. We assume that like the audience or something has like already read the story, like they're familiar with it, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, because I brought something up in my essay and I didn't know if I needed to like explain it or if I could just assume that like the reader would know what I was talking about.
Well, I would say when in doubt, explain. Okay. But you don't have to like go into intense detail about like this is what happens from beginning to end in the story, right? You don't have to go into that kind of detail. But if you want to kind of frame for the reader in a couple of sentences, like what's going on in a scene or something, yeah, that's fine.
So kind of assume that they read it like a couple years ago and they're a bit iffy on it.
That's not a bad assumption to make. Yeah, that's not a bad assumption to make.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, assume they're familiar, but maybe don't know every little concrete detail, right? So which is probably accurate, right, with my scatter brain, right? So so I remember it, but I don't remember it line for line, right? So except Frankenstein, I've taught that thing so many times. As you guys know, I didn't even have my book last week. I still taught an awesome class. So that's the only book I could get away with that, though, probably. Good question, Haley. Anything else you guys want to talk about class business wise? Yeah, I'm going to do my best to get those papers back to you during the break coming up. Like I'm going to have a few days to. I don't have to lesson plan that week, so that's going to be the week I gotta hit these papers. So I'm going to do my best to get those back to you before the end of the break. Once I do, I will give you guys a revision opportunity. And let's say you don't get an A the first time or whatever, I will give you a revision opportunity to get it right. So just go in knowing that you want to do as well as you can the first time, right? Sometimes when I say that, people are like, okay, I'll turn in a page and a half, right? And then I'll make it 3 later when he gives the revision opportunity, right? Don't do that. Give it your all, but yeah, I will give you that revision opportunity if in case it doesn't go as planned the first time.
Is that going to be for like future papers too, or just this one, since it's the first one?
The only paper that I won't let that apply to will be the final paper, just because we won't have enough time for you guys to do a revision of that. Right, you'll probably submit that during finals week, so I wouldn't have enough time to give you a revision of that one. But yeah, the second short paper and even the bibliography that we'll do later, I think is probably, you'll have enough time to revise those. So everything but the final.
Okay.
So good. Let's go ahead and get started then with our discussion of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I read this whole thing in one sitting earlier today, so yeah, it's been a couple of years since I've read it, so I enjoyed going through it again. Actually, my first time teaching it. This era of literature, I don't often get, well, I won't say this era of literature. This era of British literature, I should say, is something I don't teach very often because I'm an American lit specialist. So all that stuff that we did at the beginning of the term with Poe and Lovecraft and all that stuff, Gilman and O'Connor, like all that stuff's my wheelhouse. When we get to this British stuff, that's not my wheelhouse necessarily. So, but nonetheless, I still really enjoy, especially these British Gothic novels. This isn't actually a novel. This is what we call a novella. Novella meaning shorter novel, right? So it's a book that's kind of long, but not long enough to be considered a novel, but not short enough to be a short story, somewhere in the middle, right? So that somewhere in the middle is called a novella. So this is definitely what you call a novella. Robert Louis Stevenson is our writer of this. When was the date of this? Like I said, I haven't taught this before, so some of these details I'm a little iffy on. I think it might have been written, yeah, the 1880s. It was written in the 1880s in England. It says in my book here, the first edition came out January 1886. Okay. So Robert Louis Stevenson's our writer. He was mostly known for writing adventure stories. He also wrote Treasure Island with Long John Silver, right? So yeah, you can thank Robert Louis Stevenson for giving us the restaurant Long John Silver's, right? Because he made the character in this famous novel Treasure Island. So fantastic writer like this. Yeah, I've always enjoyed his I think this and Treasure Island are the only two things of his that I've personally read. Treasure Island, I haven't even read that since I was a kid. I'm just going to quickly Google to see what else he wrote, because I'm sure that he wrote some other good stuff. Let's see. This is what happens when I teach a text that I'm not an expert on. So Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Treasure Island, New Arabian Nights. Now, those are the the ones that I already listed are the main titles that I'm familiar with. Just between Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he made quite a name for himself just for those two, because both of those two are entrenched as classics. So yeah, again, this is one of the most famous Gothic texts. It deals with some themes that we haven't really dealt with a lot so far in this class. Maybe a little bit in Poe, just sort of like dualism between good and evil and all of us. The Imp of the Perverse was kind of about that in a way. But for the most part, this type of theme we haven't really covered. So what to say about it then, as far as some introductory remarks. This character of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde has become, very big in our pop culture. There's been tons of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movies, and the character Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde showed up in a lot of different other forms of media besides just movies about the story. Like I'm sure all of you guys have seen the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character in some way, shape, form, or fashion, right? To quote our very eloquent governor, right? Way, shape, form, or fashion. It's this mad, again, we have this mad scientist archetype coming back again. So we have this. We had it with Frankenstein, and we had it with yellow wallpaper in some respect. I didn't even have you guys read Hawthorne, but Hawthorne's works have this type of character too. So we have a mad scientist type of character. At least he's not treating other people badly. He's just treating himself badly. Right? So at least there's that. It takes place in Victorian London. So this is a Victorian novel. So this type of novel is pretty shocking for Victorian audiences. I think this was just 3 or 4 years before Dracula. So it was around this time period where both this and Dracula were being written. In case I'm sure some of you guys know about the Victorian age over in England, but the Victorian age is known as an age of manners and respectability, right? These were the decades where Queen Victoria was the monarch over in England, and she is known for very much shaping like the mores of that culture. So like most issues of like vulgarity, you guys know, like if you see like Victorian period pieces, you see women like wearing like these big giant dresses and stuff like that, right? Have any of you guys watched the TV show Downton Abbey? Any of you guys? Yeah, Jessica, you've seen Downton Abbey.
One of my favorite shows.
Is it?
Well, was. They don't make it anymore, but yeah, it was.
Yeah, Downton Abbey is very much a Victorian period piece type of show. Like you get all that manners and respectability and the big fancy dresses and all that stuff in that show for sure. But it was a time period of good morals and it's all that. But as always, there's a hidden underbelly of all of this. London, especially in this time period, was known for being very dirty. Like London pretty much relied, back in the 1880s, right? They pretty much relied completely on coal for electricity. So, needless to say, the city was cut. It's a famous phrase, like London fog. But the fog there's a lot of fog and there's also a lot of smog, right? The whole city was kind of caked under smog most of the time. So London very much had this sort of dirty appearance to it back then. There was definitely a major criminal underbelly in Victorian London. Some of you guys probably have heard of Jack the Ripper, right? This is Jack the Ripper. They never figured out who it really was, who did those murders. But, Jack the Ripper did a bunch of murders. Yeah, there very much was a big criminal underbelly in the city, and this was while most of the literature in this time period was literature of manners. You guys probably know as well Charles Dickens, right? This was when Charles Dickens was writing a lot of his books. So stuff like Great Expectations or Oliver Twist or The Christmas Carol, right? Everybody knows The Christmas Carol. That sort of time period is where we're anchored in. But while it was mostly an age of good manners, happy endings, Dickens always had happy endings in his books. Like if you read any Dickens book, it's always got a happy ending, right? So it can be like the most depressing book you've ever read in your life, but then the last chapter, he always tries to put a nice spin on it. So that's Dickens's style. If any of you guys have ever read any Dickens, I'm not the biggest Dickens fan, so if you hear a tone of indignation in my voice, right, I'm not the biggest Dickens fan, but I appreciate him nonetheless, even if I'm not his biggest fan. But he always does put these happy endings. And I bring this up because this book certainly doesn't have a happy ending, as we found out. I should mention that in this time period, this type of more risque literature, this almost horror literature, gothic, sensational type literature, these were often even published in these sort of underground magazines called penny dreadfuls. These were these like little books that were made on extremely cheap paper. They would sell them. They actually make a mention of penny dreadfuls in this book. Like they're describing, Stevenson is describing the city. He describes this one place as a place that sells penny dreadfuls. But stuff like this was published in those cheap penny dreadful magazines. They sold like hotcakes. People loved them. But like serious presses and stuff would not publish something like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Or I changed a little bit with Dracula, but for the most part, they stayed away from stuff that they deemed overly violent or overly sexual or anything like that. So, but as I said, these sort of cheaper presses published this stuff and made tons of money. Even like this is a time period where even like the porn industry and stuff like that really started to spring up. Like you started to see like a lot of dirty magazines and stuff really starting to spring up during this time period. There's always been pornography, right? But it started becoming mass produced at this time period, and that sort of like underground publishing scene. So the same underground publishing scene that gives us stuff like this also published stuff like pornography, right? So even though the Victorian age was a time of manners, there's still a lot of fun stuff going on, right? So I guess that's yeah, I say fun stuff here, right? Murders and all this type of stuff. So I'll start the class out asking you guys what your experiences with encountering the Victorian age as a time period. Like Jessica was just talking about Downton Abbey, right? But like what other books, media, films have you encountered, even like video games or something like that, right? Where else have you encountered the Victorian time period? Probably Christmas Carol, I'm guessing, for some of you, but what do you know about the Victorian period? What types of media have you seen depicting it?
As a huge Dungeons and Dragons fan, you can imagine I see that a lot. You know, pretty much every campaign is set in that kind of time period. And of course, there's like all the Skyrim and those fantasy type games. Always have that kind of element to it. That's where I've experienced most of it. I've also read quite a few books where it was in the medieval period.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Victorians are medieval. Like they're fairly close to us, like this 1880s, 1890s time period. Um, Skyrim is definitely medieval, as you said there, Haley, that 13, 14, 1500s time period.
What about Assassin's Creed?
They did make an Assassin's Creed game in Victorian England. Syndicate, I think it was. Did you play that one, Gabe? That one.
What's the one where you have like you can play like 3 different characters or something? That's the one I played. Might have been the one before that.
In Syndicate, you play it as a guy and his sister, I think.
I played that one, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a Victorian age one. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the few in the series that I haven't played. That's one I haven't gotten to yet, but it's a popular one.
I think the dresses from that time period look cool. Just like, I guess the fashion kind of, I think is very cool to look at almost, kind of aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, let's pull some of those up. Let's see if I'll just Google it here and I'll share my screen. Yeah, it's these kinds of dresses, right? These very long gowns and things like this, right? Looks like prom dresses in a way, right? But these types, it was this style that was very in fashion for women at the time period. Like most of the time, these corsets were so tight around the woman's waist, right, that it was even hard for her to breathe, right? Right? You know, they wrap them so tight. These big elaborate dresses and stuff. This is all very, very Victorian. I would say you probably also might have heard of stuff like Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that, right? Pride and Prejudice is pre-Victorian, but it's kind of got a Victorian vibe to it, if that makes sense. Even though it's before the Victorian age, it's kind of got a Victorian vibe. So some of you guys might have encountered something like that before too. What else have you guys encountered with the Victorian period, the movies you might have seen or something like that?
Is Sherlock Holmes part of the Victorian era?
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Megan. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes is definitely in that Victorian period. That's when Arthur Conan Doyle was writing all those stories. So if you've watched something like Sherlock or something like that, right, or read the Sherlock stories, that's all Victorian for sure. oftentimes there's even like a whole genre of Victorian literature called steampunk. You guys might have heard that term steampunk before, but it's called steampunk because of like for obvious reasons, like all the steam right in the cities in the Victorian city between the coal burning and the steam from the ships. Right, this was how steam. This is how the boats were mostly powered through steam. So, of course, you guys know like the Titanic and stuff. That kind of time period, that type of ship, right? Most of those were steam based. The Titanic was probably like the last of the Victorian era, that like 19 teens period. That's kind of like when the Victorian age was ending.
I'll say steampunk also has a cool sort of, how would you say it? I guess like the wardrobe that they've made it, or I guess kind of the costumes that they'll base around it. I think those have cool like little details and stuff.
Yeah, you probably know more about that genre than me, Audrey. I haven't explored the steampunk genre much, but yeah, it's a mix of Victorian age plus like punk aesthetic and stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Every time it'll pop up somewhere, I think I'm like, oh, that's a cool design, or I don't know. Some people make cool little. Let me think. I think I was playing Minecraft and someone had made a cool design of like a steampunk boat. And I was like, wow. I couldn't make that, but I thought that was cool.
That is cool. It's always fun to see people make stuff like that on something like Minecraft. Some of the stuff people make on that game blow me away. Like, I wish I was that creative. I'm not.
I can barely get a dirt block house to function without it blowing up somewhere.
Yeah, every time I've ever touched that game, I always like to look at everybody else's stuff. I never make my own. Yeah, good. I think you guys all know this time period pretty well. It seems like you guys have some kind of grounding in it. It's very popular right now. I should say that it is very popular. There's lots of Victorian TV shows and movies like this time period is kind of making a comeback in our popular imaginations. So they even made if you guys like, they even made a really cool TV show called Penny Dreadfuls, which kind of takes like a lot of these different characters we've been studying and kind of like blends them all into like one big show. I really enjoyed that show a lot when it was on. I think it's on Netflix if you guys want something to watch over spring break coming up. Of course, it's not spring break for most of you, right? Maybe me and Jessica, it's our spring break. I think most of the rest of y'all are probably still going to school next week. So most of us. So, but let's kind of, now that we've kind of introduced the framework for the time period, we can kind of then segue over into the book. I'm glad we made this distinction. It's Frankenstein, even though it was a British novel, was published in the 18 teens, right? Well, that was 80 something years before the Victorian period. But like, as I said, just to close out this segment of the class, Victorian period is known for its sort of dirty looking city, right? It's known for, especially the themes of like capitalism and stuff is usually pretty evident. You see a very wide gulf between the rich and the poor in a lot of these Victorian texts. Not really this one though. but that's often a theme you encounter. Respectability, manners. This was a time period of great scientific advancement. Oftentimes in these like Victorian texts, they'd like to show the World Fair, the first World Fair. The World Fair that happened in London right around the turn of the century, that was a pretty big deal. You oftentimes see that in these like Victorian works of fiction. But also the seedy underbelly of the Victorian period, like that we talked about with the penny dreadfuls and even like the more risque types of media that were published in the time period. That's something else I wanted to bring to your attention. So as far as the story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as we saw, it was a pretty short story. It's kind of got the organization of the story it's kind of got a Frankenstein vibe to it, right? Of course, you remember in Frankenstein, you had the boat captain at the beginning, and then Victor comes and tells the boat captain a story. Then it all comes full circle at the end. We kind of get a narrative shift a couple of times, and in this one, we go from like a third person, all-knowing narrator to then kind of Dr. Lanyon's perspective when he tells his story about when Hyde shows up to his house, and then he switches to Jekyll. Then finally at the end, we kind of see what happens when we get Jekyll's story showing up. So we kind of get the story told through a bunch of different perspectives. It's often said you kind of got to be careful with the narration here, because especially in Jekyll's story, like how much of it is reliable, how much is Jekyll maybe an unreliable narrator in his section of the story. Very much a period piece. This takes place in Victorian London. So the same place that's worrying about criminals like Jack the Ripper, stuff like that. They're very much worried about like a Mr. Hyde type of character would have been very concerning. But this is the type of city where a character like this would thrive too. But I've talked enough. I had a class right before this too, so I'm starting to grow tired of the sound of my own voice here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys now. What did you make of this read, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Your general impressions.
I really liked how Jekyll and Hyde are really just the same person, but just the two personalities, because everyone has a good side and a bad side, but you never really see them separate. They're always sort of combined, so they're not as bad. But in this story, it makes it a whole lot worse because they are separate.
Very well said there, Megan. Right. Yes, Megan's already kind of highlighting the biggest theme of the story, right? The dualism, right? The battle of good versus evil, right? In all of us. Right? As Megan pointed out very well there, most of the time that's part of our human nature, right? We have good, we have bad. We are, even if, let's say, like you're a Christian or something, right? Even still, you still sin, right? It's not like you're completely perfect over there. So we're all full of good versus and evil together, and that both of those forces together kind of make us human. Well, as Megan pointed out, what happens when you make a completely good and a completely evil and kind of split it up? What happens then? I think the story kind of asks that question. Yeah, this idea of dualism goes way back in religion and philosophy. Of course, the battle versus good and evil. Can you have God without having the devil? Right? Can you have like there's always it's a this the I'm stumbling over my own words here, but in ancient Chinese had the yin yang, right? The yin yang symbol. Let me show you that. Their culture was very much inspired by this sort of like dualism idea, but the symbol of the yin and yang, right? The good and evil, right? That's in all of us, right? That especially like the Taoism, the philosophy of Taoism, which is an ancient Chinese religion. Right? It's very much concerned with this notion of good versus evil in all of us. Can you have good without the evil? Can you have evil without good? So pretty deep theme here. There's also lots of other like world religions that especially place emphasis on this. There was also another Middle Eastern religion called Zoroastrianism, which is which definitely has this like dualism idea as a focus. So that's exactly what the story's playing with. There's good and evil. We're all gray shades of gray. But what happens if you split that gray up into light and dark? So
I think you've got to have kind of that medium ground. Like you've got to have a good and a bad to kind of figure out what would be considered bad. Like you got to have a medium ground so you can know what is good and what would be called bad, sort of deal, I'd say.
So what would you say that middle ground would be, Audrey? That's a good point.
I'd say the middle ground is kind of, I guess it depends on, morality of some people. Some people may consider one thing really bad and the others say, oh, it's pretty good. I guess it goes off of every person, but I feel like there's a definite like medium ground that everyone tries to get into. And then every once in a while they'll slip up and say, oh, this was the bad thing. This is the good thing about it. And you kind of figure it out as you go almost.
Right. Maybe like the ethics value systems that we develop. Right. Maybe this is how we keep them slipping one way or the other, perhaps. Like last week, for instance, when I asked you guys the question, like, what would you do? Would you run over the little old lady or would you run over the little kid, right? So it's these types of value systems that maybe keep us in the middle, perhaps.
I just recently saw a thing the other day, and it was like something along the lines of like, which is more good, I guess, is like being born good or having bad and then overcoming it. And I just thought that was really interesting to think about because like it's one thing to just like have that good nature and like it's so easy to be like good and kind, but it's another thing to have those kinds of urges and like not, become Mr. Hyde.
Right. What types of characters are you talking about here, Haley, with like completely, you saying there's some fiction where there's like witches that are completely good from their birth?
I just meant in general, but I guess like maybe something like you said, which is like the Wicked Oz. What's that thing with the Oz? You know what I mean? That thing. Like, and if you've ever watched the musical Wicked, or they have a book, I have it on my desk right now, but I'd have to get a bunch of stuff to get it. They wrote a book about it too, but it's like from the bad witch's perspective, and it's really cool, I think.
Welcome, Aiden. I saw you just joined us. We're talking about.
Sorry,
we're
my
talking-
internet just. Sorry, and I was having trouble reconnecting.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to tell you we're talking about the nature of good versus evil. So you're jumping into quite a conversation here. So.
All righty, thank you.
What do the rest of you guys think about this subject, good and evil? Are they inseparable? Can you have good without evil? Or evil without good?
You have to have both, right? Because if you just had one, then it would just be normal. It wouldn't be bad or good. It'd just be the ordinary.
Right?
Well, if you didn't have both, then you wouldn't know what is good and what is bad. Because in order for it to know something's good, you have to know or experience something bad.
That's like what Bob Ross said. Yeah.
You guys throwing Bob Ross quotes at me that I'm not aware of here at the moment.
Bob Brass is like the epitome of like goodness. There's no, it seems there's no evil that can be found in that man. Like that is truly sent from God as an angel, man. It was, I could watch him paint for hours.
He should be ordained as a saint in the Catholic Church, right? Him and Mr. Rogers both, right? There's no evil in Mr. Rogers either, right?
That's the duo everyone's got to look for when they think of how do I want to live my life. You got to think of living it, just like the basis of those two.
And of course, then we have people in our media who we think are like all good. Like how many people thought Bill Cosby is like the ultimate family man, right? Then we find out he's a serial rapist. So we've been disappointed a couple of times too, I suppose. But neither Bob Ross nor Mr. Rogers let us down in their lifetime. So they're moral exemplars.
Or Robin Williamson. Not that I know of, at least.
Yeah, it still makes me sad to think about what happened to him at the end of his life. He got into such a dark place mentally.
Or that one guy from Lazy Town who ended up getting cancer, and they like made a statue of him. I just love that show too, Lazy Town. I think his name was like Carl or something.
I know his character name was Robbie Rotten. I can't remember what his actual name was.
Was the character the morally righteous, or was the actor that way?
The actor was a good guy. His character was just like a silly, goofy villain.
Yeah, this is a pretty deep question, right? Can you have God, right, without the devil? Well, we know if you adhere to theology, right, you know, if you believe in God, right, you know that that the devil is God's creation. So the devil didn't exist before God. So in the Judeo-Christian sense, right, good did exist before evil, but God saw it fit to create evil. So as you guys said earlier, maybe it was so we could see the good, right? Because otherwise we would be robots that didn't have a choice.
There's also, I don't know if it's just me, but I've noticed like an upsurgence, I guess would be the word, like more redemption arcs. Probably, I mean, I feel like Avatar, The Last Airbender may have started the trend with Zuko, but I could be wrong. But I've noticed a lot more like redeemed villains lately. And I think that goes back to that is like people feel more related to the villains who have like done bad things, but now they're trying their best to be good than someone who is just like, oh, happy go lucky, like good all the time, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point, Haley. Like we're starting to see a lot of these redemption arcs or sympathy for the villain type narratives in our pop culture at the moment. It's the same thing. It kind of made me think of Batman there, right? What again? What's Batman without the Joker, right? You can't have one without the other, right? It's kind of if you guys like Batman and stuff, right? Batman plays on this dualism idea too, right? If Batman's existence creates these other monsters. So your comment, Haley, made me think of Batman because of the Joker movie that came out a couple of years ago. I don't know if you guys all saw that, but yeah, that was very much a should you feel pity for the villain type of story.
Yeah, you're right about like even if there's not a redemption arc, I have seen a lot more like love toward villains lately in general. Like even if they haven't been redeemed, I think people are just starting to have more sympathy for the bad guys, and I actually really like that a lot.
Right, like even somebody like Thanos in the Marvel movies, right? I mean, even he's kind of got a point, right? If you want to really if you want to break it down, right? Yeah, I mean this is what this whole story is about. I found this story really fascinating. Because what is so evil about Hyde? Like they say that he's evil, right? They say that he's evil, but none of the characters can ever really describe why he's evil. Like we know that he murders a guy. He runs over a little girl on the street at the beginning of the story and tries to slip by without apologizing. Like he just like bulldozes over. I laugh every time I read that. Maybe I'm just messed up. I don't know. That always makes me laugh every time I read the opening of the story, knowing that this like little Neanderthal looking man just kind of like bulldozed over this little girl on the street. It just kind of makes me laugh. But maybe that makes me a horrible human being. I don't know. But nobody can really describe what makes Hyde evil or repugnant other than them saying that he is. They get bad vibes from him. Have some of you guys ever felt like that about a person? Maybe like your instincts told you something like this person is bad, and then maybe later your instincts were confirmed to be correct. I see you shaking your head there, Haley. You got somebody in mind.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Anybody got a specific anecdote you want to tell? You don't have to name names, of course, but do you want to? Anybody ever been in that boat where you just had a hunch? Your hunch turned out to be correct.
I don't know if this like goes along the lines with that, but like I have this friend who tends to lie a lot, even like by the little with the little things. Like, it could be something. How do I word it? It's like they ate a fry, and they'll go up to you and be like, "I didn't eat no fry at all." Or it could be something like, "I went to the store yesterday," even though they didn't. And it's just like little tiny lies that they do, and you can tell that they're lies. I feel that they're lies. I can tell that they're lies.
Yeah, the person lies so much they start to believe their own lies. That type of scenario.
Yeah, Daisy is that's a like that's one of the main things that can really like set off your guts about someone is when they're you can tell they're sort of a compulsive liar. And it's like some people can't I don't think some people can help that or like they're working on it. So like I try not to like judge them, but yeah, just like that stuff where it's like the little like random lies that are obsolete, like there's no reason to lie about that. That's one of those things that can really just like be like something's off here.
Yeah, you guys are kind of going along the lines with this of this is some type of experience that you've encountered with this person that sets off this hunch. Maybe with Hyde, it seems like it's even like a first impression and just looking at their looks or something, right? Like you just look at their looks and they're like, this person's bad news.
I've had a lot of those experiences. I work at a restaurant where I work outside in the drive-thru, and I get a bunch of guests that I can just feel off about. It's happened. Like one time, someone was walking. They had like an actual axe, and it was just like walking around the building. And I'm like, why would you be doing that? Like they were not aggressive. Like they didn't do anything, but they were just standing there so awkwardly. It was very sketchy. And if someone asked me, "Aren't you scared out here being alone? Aren't you afraid someone's going to hurt you?" And I'm like, I wasn't until you just said that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. All right. Yeah, you got to listen to that instinct, right? Whenever you have that instinct is there for a reason. Um, often it's not it's not a logical instinct, right? This isn't something that our brain logically deduces. This is just something we feel. Yeah, but if you've worked in the public, as you just said there, Jesse, I'm sure that all of you have had that type of experience, or maybe not something so horrifying. Nicole, this person might be a murderer or something, right? But maybe even something like, oh, I can tell this person's going to be an ass to me today, right? I can just tell. Right, here it comes, right? Even something like that. Some of you guys probably get those hunches.
I mean, yeah, one time this guy came in and he was being like really weird or whatever, just like wasn't talking a lot, and then he gave me a ring for a tip. So yeah, that was odd.
Oh, is he proposing to you there, Kylie?
I mean, I hope not.
Yeah, what was it? A ring out of like a Cracker Jack box, something like that.
He had like a bunch, like he just like pulled out like a whole bunch of rings out of his like pocket.
What if it was Mr. Beast, Kylie? What if
No, it
Mr.
wasn't.
Beast came to your restaurant?
It was not
He could have
him.
dressed up.
No, the face is no. But he like said that he does it for like a bunch of people, and then he was like, "This one looks like a ring that's meant for you." Like gave it to me.
Sometimes I hate working in the public.
I agree.
Yeah, when I was in college, I worked at Walmart as a cashier, so I know all about your guys' pain as far as working in the public. But I guess sometimes these vibes and stuff don't happen to people too, right? Like think about like how many people somebody like Ted Bundy got, right? Like he projected this like innocent vibe where like he would pretend to be hurt, like he would like do stuff like act like he's lifting a couch and couldn't lift it or something. Hey, help me lift this couch in the car, right? People would often fall victim to that sort of like that disability. Like he would pretend to be disabled and stuff, and people would feel sorry for him, and that's how he often lured his victims in. So that type of thing happens too, right? Where that instinct doesn't kick off or called off guard. Always be paranoid. I guess that's what I'm telling you guys. I'll always be paranoid. So yeah, I actually listened to a podcast. I'll tell you this guy. There's a story I heard on this podcast, but I'll try. I might link this podcast to you after class. This made me think of this, but this guy told us a story about how he worked at a gas station next to the interstate, and he and his dad are in there. He said this lady comes into the gas station and it's like, hey, my car's broke down on the interstate. Like, will you give me a ride or something? He talks about like how she had this like dirty blonde hair, how she kind of looked like, I don't know. He describes her as like she kind of looks like white trashish, like he describes her that way. But it seems like she's fairly normal. But he said the guy was just a teenager, but his reaction was like, okay, yeah. They said his dad was like, no, you're not. We're not going to do that. You're on your own. And the podcast said like 6 months later, it came up on TV. What was her Aline? What was her last name?
Was it Warmos?
Warmos. Yeah, it was Aline Warmos. One of the only known female serial killers. Right? She would oftentimes like lure men into, like she was a prostitute, right? But she would oftentimes lure men into that type of situation and then kill them, right? So she killed a bunch of men. She tried to go in this gas station and get a ride or something, but that father's like instinct kicked off, right? And he didn't know why. And then like 6 months later, he confirmed it. Like, oh yeah, that was her. So
Actually, it's not a serial killer, but that happened kind of to me recently. Back when I was in like preschool, I had this school counselor, and like he was my favorite dude ever. I loved him, my mom loved him, but my dad never liked him. He always said there's something off about him. Just recently we found out he's a pedophile. So yeah.
Yeah, what was he doing, Haley? Like preying on like high school girls, or hopefully
No, it was like young, like elementary school kids. They found a bunch of child porn on his computer.
Oh, that's horrible. That had to
Yeah, and they keep finding more stuff.
Yeah, that had to have broke your heart when you found that out. So
My favorite part about your story, Haley, that you just said was how you said this happened to me recently, and then you said back when I was in kindergarten.
Okay, I found out recently is what I meant. And by recently I meant like 4 months ago. recent enough.
I know what you meant because you told me the story already, but I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. You got me there. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I'll link you. I'll find that podcast and link it to you guys after class. It's a really interesting read.
Is it Mr. Ballin by any chance? The podcast guy?
No, I think the podcast that I heard that story, I think it's called Radio Rentals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know that one, Haley, that podcast?
No, I don't. But Mr. Ballin, it's his name sounds like he's gonna be like, oh, it's crazy. But that's just his name. And he makes like true crime YouTube videos, and he's a great storyteller, and he recently made a podcast.
I'll have to check that out. Mr. Bones.
You should. Yeah, it's like Ballen.
Yeah, the Radio Rental podcast is hosted by the Dwight on The Office. He hosts it, and like they tell like all these creepy stories and stuff. It's a pretty good one. But I guess if we can maybe take a look at some descriptions here. I'm looking at you guys probably all have different. I read, by the way, but again, I'm not an expert on this text. I should have anticipated that problem with Frankenstein, but I didn't. I've laughed telling a bunch of people about our class a couple of weeks ago where we all had different editions of Frankenstein, and I forgot. I've told a couple of my other English professor friends about that. I'm like, whoops. But I have read that this text also has different versions. So we might run into that problem again. I don't know. But really early on in the first chapter, Story of the Door, it's page 11 in my version, but I know you guys all have different versions. The first description that I highlighted of Mr. Hyde, he says, he is not easy to describe. There's something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce knew why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He's an extraordinary looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir, I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him. And it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment. So there's your description there, right? Nothing seems completely out of the ordinary. It's not like this guy has got like a bunch of scars on his face or something, like projecting he's evil. Something uncanny that you can't quite describe, like we've been talking about. So we find out that Hyde is smaller than Jekyll, right? We learn that Jekyll is actually this like pretty tall, lanky guy, and we find out that Hyde's this like short. I called him a Neanderthal earlier, right? He's just like short, husky looking guy, right? That's kind of like what Hyde looks like. Yeah, Hyde looks like a guy that played linebacker or something, right? Whereas Jekyll's this tall, like thin man. They even explain that with this dualism idea, like Jekyll's good is better than has triumphed over his evil throughout most of his life. So that's why Hyde is so much shorter than he is, because the good for that part of his life has superseded the evil. There's another good description here. Let's see. I'll read another passage for you. I highlighted another passage. It's in Jekyll's full statement of the case, pretty close to the end. Jekyll says, in and so far I was doubtless right. I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. This, as I take it, was at first without a visible this, as I take it, was because all human beings, as we meet them, are commingled out of good and evil. Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil. Another passage I highlighted in like a page after that. This familiar that I called out of my own soul and sent forth alone to do his good pleasure was a being inherently malign and villainous. His every act and thought centered on self, drinking pleasure with bestial avidity from any degree of torture to another, relentless like a man of stone. So, interesting, pretty vivid descriptions of Hyde here. Plus, he likes to trample over little girls on the street. So there's that too, without apologizing. So. Oftentimes, like film adaptations and stuff of this, they often do it in different ways. Like if you've ever, have any of you guys ever watched like a Dr. Jekyll film or a piece of media where you've seen this character before I start prattling on about it? I was going to say most of the time the character is painted as this like ugly looking troll looking man, right? That's oftentimes what Hyde looks like. Oftentimes Hyde is a lot stronger than Jekyll, right? Oftentimes Hyde has like this really intense physical strength. It's not something we really get in the story, but oftentimes the films will play it that way. Oftentimes the films will take something like will take this idea, but instead of a physical appearance, will like make the Hyde character do horrible things like kill, or well, he does kill once in the book, but he kills or go like oftentimes it'll shows the Hyde character like being a super sexual character, stuff like that too. So different versions of the text all interpret this Hyde character in different ways. This is a interesting story though, from the standpoint, it's not like Frankenstein, right? Where you have like a literal monster. This is a story. This is a story kind of like the Southern Gothic story we read with like the misfit, right? The true villainy is in ourselves. It's kind of this is kind of like one of those types of stories. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun as the further we go through it, that the more that Jekyll takes the potion and becomes Hyde, the more Hyde starts to take control, right? So it's almost like these two forces within his mind are kind of like wrestling it out and duking it out. And that's all we lost. That's all we lost. Haley, her iPad must have died again, right? But these two forces are kind of duking it out. And the more that Jekyll kind of wrestles with Hyde, the more Hyde starts to win. And so after a while, Hyde manifests himself more than Jekyll. So after a while, Hyde has to take the potion to become Jekyll just for a short time. So it's almost like this story is very much an interesting allegory of like the struggle we all face, right, between good and evil. like if you get into a bad part of your life, right? Maybe like again, it depends how religious you're talking here, right? But if you get into a part of your life where maybe you sin a lot, right? You sort of get stuck in a vicious cycle. Right? Maybe the Hyde starts coming out more, and the Jekyll in you ceases to be. But that part of you still there. Maybe that's when you redeem yourself or something. So that's something that we've all went through in some respect, right? We've all went through our ups and downs. Like even most of you guys are still pretty young, but even, I'm sure even all of you guys have been through those phases, right? Where maybe your head kind of got stuck in a bad place for a while. You became somebody who you didn't like. So the story definitely plays with this idea. You can read it as this like allegory of like maybe you can kind of read this as like a metaphor or like maybe like depression or something like that if you would want to take it that way. Hide is what happens when you let that kind of thing take over. Jesse said that Haley's iPad died. I called it. I called it. Any of you guys want to comment on? Again, we're getting awful deep here, right? But any of you guys want to comment on this notion of maybe the story's an allegory for like depression, or it's about maybe like certain times in our life, like we go through rough patches and let the evil take over the good.
It's kind of like, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you first.
I was going to say that it's kind of like the little story that I read one time. It's like every person has two wolves inside of them, both good and evil, and whichever one you feed is what you become. So in a way, it's kind of like what you allow yourself to do and continuously do, you kind of become numb to it, and it's easier the next time.
Right. Yeah. So the more you feed that evil instinct, right, the easier it gets to feed it. That's an interesting story, Jess. I haven't heard that about the wolf. Jesse, what was you going to say?
It's not as deep as that. It's like not. But my stepmom's name is Angela, and when she gets angry, she calls that evil Angelica. And every single time I hear like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I think of that because one time she got mad and was like, "Don't let my evil Angelica come out again." Like it's a joke, but like it is completely different personality when she gets mad. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe you know some people that are kind of bipolar, right? So maybe some of you are bipolar, right? But usually that sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality comes out there whenever you're talking about that. Yeah, I've known a few people in my day who are like that, like perfectly great person one moment, and then something's happens, and it just something snaps. Anybody else got a comment on this idea? Haley, you left us for a second, but we're talking about like maybe the Hyde character is like a metaphor for depression or something like that.
Stop. I hate that my iPad died like last week, and I had been charging it all throughout the week, when I could, just like to try and make sure it was charged, but Zoom absolutely drains its battery. So I downloaded Zoom on my phone, and hopefully that will not drain the battery of my phone and I'll be okay. But I have to have my camera off. But oh yeah, I thought that when I read the story, I was like, I feel like this could really be linked to like obviously like a multiple personality disorder kind of thing, but I could also see it with like mental disorders, because sometimes like when you have like some kind of mental illness, you know, you're just not yourself. Like you almost go into like a blind state.
Right? Yeah, you become someone completely different. Yeah, even people who get on like drugs and stuff, right? You guys probably all know somebody in that situation, just based on the place we live with the problems we have. But you might know somebody who got on drugs or something. They were the best person before that, and then when they get on that, they become someone completely different. So I'm sure all of you could probably share a story of someone you know in that regard, just because it's so problematic here in our area. Addictions and stuff will do bad things to people. Now, I want to raise another layer to the story that I haven't raised yet. I talked about how the story, so we're getting ready to talk about sexuality in the story. But I told you guys that oftentimes these film adaptations and stuff will show Hyde as like, instead of being like this ugly ogre, it'll show him being like this character completely consumed by like sexual drives and stuff. So oftentimes it doesn't paint him as ugly, right? It paints him as the opposite. But this is a Victorian novel, and one layer that I want to talk to you guys about with this is, earlier in the class, whenever we went over the different literary schools, we talked about what was called queer theory, right? Of course, queer theory is a form of literary studies that's done right now that looks at discourses about different sexualities that aren't just heterosexuality, and how they've always been represented in different fiction. This is the Victorian period, and I told you guys that this is a time period of respectability and manners. This century, the 1800s, is actually the time period where that identity of being gay first came out. Right? Nobody called themselves gay until like I prefer men, or a woman prefers women, or whatever. Nobody said that until the 1800s. Of course, you've always had that in the world, right? But that identity of being like gay or lesbian or bisexual or whatever, right? All of that stuff, all those identities started in the 1800s. So oftentimes with this older literature never spells it out, right? It'll never kind of spell it out that a character's like this. It's not like it is today. Like they would oftentimes talk about it, but in these sort of veiled, symbolic ways. But I bring this up because oftentimes in the book, it describes Hyde as having a queer appearance, right? They actually use the word queer a lot. And of course, you guys know that I told you guys earlier in the class that like especially a lot of literary critics who like to write about this are LGBT themselves, but they take that term queer when they say queer theory, because the term queer has always had a negative connotation, right? If you call somebody a queer, right, that's a nasty word. But oftentimes, so that's why that word's used, in case you were wondering, like, why is he saying that? Like they use that word to celebrate it in this type of like literary study. But I raised the point about the word queer here, because Hyde is often described as being as having a queer like appearance, and that word can mean different things. Let me actually show you guys something. This is something you guys probably don't know about. I don't even think Southern has access to it. Give me a moment. I actually just thought of this on the spur of the moment. See if I have access to this.
If you've read The Great Gatsby, I don't know when that was written exactly, but there's a lot of theories about that, and it actually acknowledges that in the foreword, because I have the book with the like Frankenstein did, where it was like a excerpt about the author and stuff, and it brings that up, and I think it does confirm it. I went and grabbed it because it was easy.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've read Gatsby, Haley. That would make sense for that book. That book was written in the 1920s, so it wasn't written too long after this.
Oh yeah, that's like 10 years after it. I had to Google it after I got it mixed up with the medieval times.
Yeah, Gatsby's roughly around this time period. And of course, it wasn't spelled out so directly there either. Let me show you guys this. I'm going to look up the word queer in this resource. One of the most interesting things, there's a dictionary that's called the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. And if you look for a word on here, the Oxford English Dictionary is amazing because it traces all the different meanings of the word throughout history. So like you can tell it traces back to the first recorded instance of when this word was used and what it meant then. And it kind of shows you how the meaning of the word changes and evolves over time. Let me actually look. I didn't plan this. This is something that just kind of hit me in the spur of the moment. Let's see what it says here. Queer is an adjective. Let's look at that. So let me zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see it good. So this is really cool. Like it traces the word back like all the way to its first usage in like the 1500s. So this is Middle English, right? You guys probably gonna have a hard time reading that. That's Middle English. That's what English sounded like in the Middle Ages. But one of the first meanings of the word is strange, odd, peculiar, eccentric. And you can kind of see different examples of how the word is used throughout time. So it says here, in the queer old room with its still queer attempts at decoration, right? So like this instance, it's used to describe it's eccentric. It shows how that usage of the word still shows up a lot today. Here's another meaning of the word that says out of sorts, unwell, faint, giddy. So maybe a person is sick or something, right? So oftentimes that word will be used in that context. And then, of course, it has its meaning with homosexuality, and it traces that back to 1914. So this is beyond the normal dictionary, right? The normal dictionary will just tell you the different meanings of the word. Normal dictionary won't trace it all the way back throughout history. So in case you guys, that's a cool thing. It's just a cool piece of knowledge to know. There's a dictionary called the Oxford English Dictionary that traces all these different things. Southern's library might have a copy of it. If they do, it's probably a hard copy. I have access to the digital copy through WVU. But yeah, fun trivia for you there. Maybe it'll be a question for you on Jeopardy or something sometime, right? But that's in case you guys do some type of research later in the course, maybe you would want to know the history of a word and its usage or something. The OED is the resource you go to in that case. But I talked about the word, right? But the words used to describe Hyde, and well, we know what the word's later connotation is. So oftentimes these writers would talk about that and use that sort of vocabulary as sort of a veiled signifier, like, oh, this is what we're talking about. We're just not going to say it. So I don't know. Did any of you guys get that from the story, or did you maybe now that I've explained this, does maybe something click that this might be a possible interpretation of this character? The Hyde in him is actually might actually be like a form of sexuality that's taboo to the time.
I didn't realize it while I was reading, but now that you mention it, it does make a lot of sense, because even his name, Hyde, he might want to hide his sexuality. It makes so much more sense now.
Yeah, you know what, Megan, that's brilliant. I did not think of that. Right, that's a brilliant observation there. So
You just blew my mind. What the heck?
Yeah, you just made my brain explode there, Megan. So
At first, I thought like his name, like Hyde, meant like his hidden personality, like the bad part. But now it does like make sense for it to be his homosexuality.
yeah, my brain just exploded, right? So yeah, that's a very good observation. I don't know, some of the rest of you guys are being unusually quiet here. Some of my normal culprits who normally talk aren't talking. I'm suspicious. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to name names, but I'm on to you. Right? So, but did any of the rest of you guys get this as a possible meaning, or maybe now that we're talking about it, makes sense, or do you disagree with this possible interpretation? Maybe we're overthinking it, or something like that.
I think it's a good way to interpret this story, but I would hope that he's not hiding that he's a murderer that likes to trample over kids. I mean, anything else I think is good about that, but I would hope that what he's trying to hide is that he's not like a serial killer that likes just crushing people over.
Right. Yeah, he seems kind of unapologetic about that. he even kind of pays the guy off, like, dude, if this will get you off my back, fine, I'll give you like $100. Like, yeah, I trampled the little girl. What of it? Jessica, I saw you shaking your head a second ago. Is this an interpretation that you didn't think of, or maybe it's interpretation you agree or disagree with?
I was totally clueless, but now it actually totally makes sense. I'm still not recovered from the mind blowing factor there because didn't even connect it, and I'm a little bit ashamed of myself.
Yeah, Megan, maybe that should be like your research paper later. I was talking about research papers. That might be a good topic for you.
Yeah, it would. I also kind of thought like Jekyll, like it kind of has like the word kill in it. And at the end of the story, he tries to kill himself. But I didn't know if that was as accurate.
Yeah, sure enough. Yeah, KYLL, kill. Yeah, he murdered Hyde / Jekyll murders himself at the end. Definitely not a happy ending here, right? So again, we have another story with a very morose ending. So well, last week the monster burned himself alive. So I guess suicide by poisoning isn't as bad as that. So this week's not quite as depressing. I don't know. Anybody else here want to comment on this particular thread that we're on? I'll just say this. I find this area of literary study fascinating. I've never like written a paper or done like any research on this type of thing myself, but I've always found these interpretations interesting when I come across them. And as I was reading it today, when I saw that word, it automatically clicked. Like, oh, maybe this might be something. Knowing what I know about queer studies and stuff, right? It definitely made me draw the connection. So I'm sure if we took a look through the scholarship on this, I actually don't know a lot about the scholarship, like what people have written about this. I'm sure if we took a look, I'm sure somebody's probably touched on this before, but maybe not, right? Maybe we're stumbling on a new idea here. But it looks like we're quickly running out of time. I felt like we had a very fruitful discussion of the text. Let me write down everybody who's here. Was somebody here who got disconnected or anything like that? I've seen some people drop in and out.
I saw someone left. I forgot their name, but I saw it just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, end of the class is always when I take the roll. Kenzie, you were one of the people I was thinking was being very unusually quiet tonight. So I'm writing your name down, but I'm on you. Yeah, you're being quiet over there.
Today's just a sleepy day for me. I'm tired. I
get-
was listening though.
I get it. I feel that.
I have an unrelated but important question for you.
Sure.
Do you think there's more doors or wheels in the world?
Doors or wheels? Has to be Well, here we go.
Stop. Is this what you were talking about in the bathroom earlier? I was literally in the stall and I was like, what are they talking about? I thought you meant in the car.
I would say doors.
It's like a thing, I guess, on TikTok. People are talking about it, but I can't really decide which team I'm on.
I'm Team Wills.
Think about
I
all the
think it's
toy cars.
doors. Think of all the doors that are on the cars.
There's 2
doors on houses, buildings, cars, anything.
Well,
There's
the
too many
window
doors. Mailboxes are doors.
There's so many doors.
You have to think, there's so many wheels.
But they're always accompanied by doors.
No. No.
Exactly.
Your rolly chair have a door on it?
Bicycles and scooters and skateboards.
Yeah, Audrey.
Well, I'm gonna put a door on them. I'm gonna
There's
add to
more
the
houses
door.
and buildings than cars and stuff in the world, and like bikes.
No, we talking about the whole world. The entire world. It's wheels.
You know how
I'm
many
going with
buildings there are?
doors.
Gabe was who was here who fell off. Gabe.
You guys are disappointing me right now. It's definitely wheels.
I agree, Riley.
Yeah, I think this Megan already blew me away with the Hyde comments, and now I'm going to have to retreat to the Himalayas and figure out this question over doors versus wheels. So, so the interesting philosophical questions here, right? So we're all about those in this class.
Exactly. When I heard that question, I literally thought of this class immediately.
Did you?
I knew that last week when I heard about it, I knew I was going to ask it during this class.
Yeah, this isn't just English class; it's also philosophy class. In case you guys figure this out. All right, guys. So again, it won't be till 3 weeks from now until we all see each other again. So enjoy the week off from college for most of you next week. I guess you still got your high school responsibilities. The week of the 24th, be sure to come out to the play if you can. Y'all can carpool down to Logan or something. Then the 31st, the week of the 31st, we'll read Henry James's Turn of the Screw. Now, I will say this about James. James is known for having this like really dry style. So he's a very brilliant read. He's very interested in psychology and stuff. So we're definitely going to have lots of good discussion about psychology that week. But his style is a little dry. But if you can get past that sort of dry style, there's a lot of substance there. James is very interested in writing real stories, right? These are stories that can really happen in reality. So in his attempt to do that, his style oftentimes is a little dry, but it's dry for a reason, if that makes sense. So Turn of the Screw is about as long as this, but maybe do give yourself a little extra time to read it, because it starts out kind of, I'll just say this, it does start out kind of slow, but it picks up right around the middle. So yeah, don't give up on it in the early chapters. I guess that's what I'm telling you. Okay. All right, guys. So until then, take care. Like I said, I'll get some stuff up for you that 2 weeks from now to kind of preview the paper process ahead. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.